When it comes to the Seattle Kraken expansion draft coming up here in just a couple of months, it's true, as you might expect, that for the most part, the good teams will be offering the Kraken better players, while the not as good or rebuilding teams won't be offering them quite as much. But there are some exceptions, and the New Jersey Devils are certainly one of them, because while they are nowhere near the top of the league, when July rolls around, they will be offering the Kraken some interesting options. The Devils are still very much in rebuilding mode, as evidenced by their 29th place finish this season with a record of 19-30-7. But fortunately for them, it does seem like there might be some hope that the path out of rebuilding is on the horizon, as some of their younger guys have started to contribute, especially this season. And despite their record with some of those younger guys, they did show some flashes this season of what the future could hold for the Devils. Though, again, it is obvious that they still will need some seasoning before they're ready for the pressure cooker of the playoffs. And the fortunate part for the Kraken is that there will be a chunk of these contributing younger players exposed come the expansion draft, even with the Devils having one of the longer exempt lists that includes names like Jack Hughes and Ty Smith. Now, when it comes to who among these younger players will be exposed and who will be protected, that is a little bit more of a puzzle, especially on the forward end as we start looking at who will probably end up being protected here. Now, they still do get to protect at least 7 of their young forwards, which will certainly include guys like Nico Hischier, Pavel Zacha, and Jasper Bratt. I also think it's fairly safe to say that Miles Wood and Mike McLeod will also probably find their way onto this protection list. So then the question just is, who gets those last 2 spots? Well, I still am going to give one of those to Andreas Johnsson, even though this season certainly didn't go the way that either he or the Devils would have liked it to for him, with just 11 points in 50 games. But he is the most veteran presence on the forward end for them. And then that last spot comes down to one of either Yanni Kuokkanen or Yegor Sharangovich. But considering the year he had, I'm going to give the edge here to Sharangovich for getting that 7th spot. There is also the possibility that with the off year that Andreas Johnsson had, that he could end up exposed so that they can protect both Kuokkanen and Sharangovich. Of course, you may have noticed that a number of those guys don't have contracts yet for next season, which includes both Sharangovich and Kuokkanen as well as McLeod. Well, that's where the situation on the forward end for the Devils becomes a bit of a puzzle, and actually what gives the Devils some amount of flexibility in that they might be able to steer the Kraken's hand a bit into who they end up picking. Because remember, as part of the rules for the expansion draft, the Devils do have to expose at least 2 eligible forwards who are both under contract through the 2022 season and have played either 54 games in the last 2 years or 27 games in the 2021 season. And as things stand right now, the Devils only have 5 forwards who meet those requirements, all of whom are on that protection list, though Andreas Johnsson is one of them, so he could end up exposed and filling one of those 2 spots, but that still leaves another guy that they end up having to sign and expose. And while again, especially considering that almost the entirety of their forward end who are on expiring contracts are set to be RFAs, they would seem to have quite a bit of flexibility in being able to just sign particular guys that they want to expose to the Kraken and wait to sign other ones. They don't have a ton of flexibility when it comes to eligible players, because outside of the 5 who already have contracts on that protection list, there's only 5 other forwards who have the number of games played over the last 2 seasons or last season that could even help fulfill those requirements if they had contracts. And 3 of those 5 are Kuokkanen, Sharangovich, and McLeod. So it definitely will be interesting to see who ends up getting contracts before the expansion draft on the forward end for the Devils, and it could have a pretty big impact on who the Kraken end up picking. And for the Devils, the defensive end offers a similar type of puzzle, but this time with a little bit more of a clear way out. Here again, Ty Smith is exempt, so then the 3 protection spots I have going to Ryan Murray, Damon Severson, and Will Butcher. And then in goal, that protection spot I think is pretty obvious. It will clearly be going to Mackenzie Blackwood. So then the situation on the defensive end for the Devils. Now, Murray is set to be UFA at the end of the season, so they could expose him and try to sign him after the expansion draft in order to protect Subban. But again, they still need to expose one defenseman that fits those same requirements of games played and having a contract through next year. And currently, they only have 5 defensemen who have those games played for that part of the exposure requirement. And with or without contracts, 3 of those 5 are going to be protected, which means they just have 2 players that they can choose from of somebody that will have a contract and will have the games played. So that would mean, assuming Severson is a lock on the defensive end, that they would have to expose either Subban or Butcher, or sign and expose one of Murray or Siegenthaler. All of that is to say that as we do now start looking at players that could be available for the Kraken to select from, most of the guys we're going to talk about here don't have contracts through next season just yet, but with the knowledge that at least a couple of them will be signed before the expansion draft. And we'll start on the forward end with Sharangovich and Kuokkanen, again, one of whom is very likely to end up being protected, though I'm not exactly sure who it will be. And yes, there is the possibility that both end up protected, but I think there's a decent chance that one of these 2 is exposed. Of the 2, at least right now anyway, once again, Sharangovich is the one that I think is a little bit more likely to end up protected, because the soon-to-be 23-year-old is coming off of an impressive rookie season where he put up 30 points in 54 games on 16 goals and 14 assists. A performance that made him 4th in team scoring and 3rd in goals scored for the Devils this season. Where he is at a bit of a disadvantage, at least compared to Kuokkanen anyway, is in his professional experience. As before this season anyway, he had only played 2 years in the AHL and 1 year in the KHL. And this year he did play both in the NHL and KHL, but still there isn't a whole lot to look back on, and what there is to look back on is not that comparable to what he did this year, as while he impressed at really both the KHL and especially NHL levels this season, his scoring potential is not something that they would have seen coming based on what he had done in the AHL and KHL before, where he had at best been a half a point per game type of player. And honestly, even saying that he was about a half a point per game player is being a bit generous, as in his first season in the AHL 2 years ago, he put up just 17 points in 68 games. So to go from that to now putting up 30 points in 54 games at the NHL level 2 years later is quite a bit of rapid improvement. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not he can continue that improvement and continue this performance at the NHL level going forward, and whether or not the Devils gamble on him being able to. Meanwhile, Kuokkanen also had a pretty good season at the NHL level this year, though just not quite as good. The 2016 second-round pick, who can play both on the wing and at center, and is about to turn 23 here in the next week, has played in at least 1 game of 4 different NHL seasons. But with that being said, until this year, he didn't really have substantial playing time. This last season, he put up 25 points on 8 goals and 17 assists in the 50 games that he played. So, pretty comparable points production-wise to what Sharangovich was able to do, but with more of that coming as assists rather than goals. Unlike Sharangovich, though, he does have at least a little bit more when it comes to previous professional experience, and especially in his previous AHL experience, has shown quite a bit more of that points-producing player that he showed that he could be this year, with having had 40 points in 60 games in his first year in the AHL in the 2017-18 season, then 38 points in 48 games the next year, and last year had 48 points in 56 games with 15 goals and 33 assists. So suddenly having 25 points in 50 games at the NHL level this year is not quite as much out of the blue as what Sharangovich did. Now, even with Sharangovich protected, assuming the Devils also want to hang on to Kuokkanen, there still are a couple of ways that they can prevent or at least dissuade Seattle from taking him. They can still very much go the route of exposing Andreas Johansson in order to protect Kuokkanen, but even with Johansson protected, they could also expose Kuokkanen but without a contract for the 2022 season, gambling that Seattle won't go ahead and pick an unsigned RFA and then try to sign him after the expansion draft. And yes, they could also do the same thing with Sharangovich, who is also set to be an RFA. But in either one of those 2 scenarios, the Devils still have to sign at least 1 or 2 more forwards with the appropriate amount of games played in order to meet the exposure requirements. And with those guys all being hopefully in some way protected or unsigned, that only leaves 2 other options. meaning that a guy like Nick Merkley could definitely end up with a contract and exposed. Merkley, who, like Kuokkanen, has a birthday coming up here in the next week, is about to turn 24, and was the 30th overall pick in the first round of the 2015 NHL Draft. In his career, he's played in 32 NHL games with 12 points on 3 goals and 9 assists, though almost all of that came in the 2021 season, where he played 27 games with 10 points on 2 goals and 8 assists. He too has also played well at the AHL level over the last few years, ever since being a point-per-game player in the WHL for 4 seasons, which he was able to keep up in his first season at the AHL level, but has fallen a bit off that pace over the last couple of seasons, though he still is somewhere in the range of at least 2 points in every 3 games. Really, one of the biggest differences between him and Sharangovich or Kuokkanen, all of whom have limited NHL experience and just a few seasons at the AHL level, is the fact that he didn't, in his time at the NHL this season, play quite as strong of a two-way game, though in his limited playing time he did play more physically than either one did. Ultimately though, with any one of these 3 guys, it's still just one season and they're all very young, and their careers could go in any one of a number of different directions from here on out, so it's hard to draw any for sure conclusions from what they've been able to do so far. And that's certainly no different when it comes to the last potential option of a player who's played enough games that with a contract could fulfill the Devils' exposure requirements. That being Nathan Bastian. The 23-year-old 2016 second-round pick has also been able to hold his own at the AHL level, though he is much closer to being more of a half a point per game player than being a point per game player like a couple of the other guys were. Like the other 3 though, he also got his first taste of substantial NHL playing time this season. He did have 3 points in 7 games last year, but this year he got into 41 games where he had 10 points on 3 goals and 7 assists. So, based on his AHL experience or even his NHL experience this season, he wouldn't seem to be the points producer or have the ceiling of a points producer that any of those other 3 players could have. But where he makes his difference and certainly outshines any one of those other 3 guys is in the physical part of the game. At 6'4" and just over 200 pounds, he certainly is the biggest of the 4 players that we've talked about here, and he showed this year that he is not afraid to use it, with 139 hits in those 41 games he played this season, even considering that he had just over 12 minutes of ice time per game. So while he may never have the points production that you would want from a top 6 type of forward like one of those other 3 guys might be able to turn into, he certainly does seem destined to be a solid part of a third line with his physical, intimidating type of playstyle. But again, this is probably another prospect level guy that wouldn't be a core part of the Kraken's starting roster on opening day and more likely would start off at the AHL level. Really with the Devils though, that's just kind of the way it is. The way their roster's set up and the way their protection list seems likely to go means that there just aren't going to be a whole lot of NHL veteran type of players that are likely to for sure be able to contribute right away for the Kraken. Really the only guy that could likely end up exposed that could fit that type of role, who also happens to be the player that people talk most about when it comes to the expansion draft in the Devils, would be PK Subban. Subban is certainly at least one of the biggest, flashiest, and most well-known names that could be a part of this expansion draft, which is why he's often talked about when it comes to who the Kraken could get from the Devils. He's been a fan favorite pretty much anywhere he's gone, and certainly has a much more outgoing type of personality than your typical NHL player. Plus, he's a 3-time All-Star and former Norris Trophy winner. So as far as NHL experience, and especially successful NHL experience is concerned, he is easily the best option that the Devils have to offer. With that all having been said though, having just turned 32, over the last couple of years, he also has been showing signs that his best is certainly behind him. After having been drafted in the second round of the 2007 draft by the Montreal Canadiens, Subban has played in at least part of 12 different NHL seasons, in that time playing in 757 games, where he has 445 points on 110 goals and 335 assists. which for a defenseman is certainly very strong points production and is a large part of what has earned him a lot of the accolades that he's had throughout his career. He has also been a very tough player throughout his career though, both physically and getting in the way of shots, with over 1,000 block shots in the course of his career, with multiple seasons over 100, and same goes for hits, though he's just short of 1,000 there with 975 in those 757 games. If there is one thing that he's been criticized most over the course of his career for, though, as a defenseman, it's him being a little bit better on the offensive end than on the defensive end. Though, to be fair, his offensive production when it comes to his possession stats definitely seems to have outweighed any kind of deficit that he might offer on the defensive end, as he has a career Corsi for percentage of 51.9 and a career expected plus minus of 2.9. Neither of which are necessarily amazing or anything like that, but he does have a number of seasons in there that are very good. Again, though, the question marks start to come in how much he has left to offer, as in the last 3 seasons, he definitely has fallen off quite substantially when it comes to points production, especially in the last 2 years in New Jersey, though part of that could be being part of the Devils, but still falling off to just 18 points in 68 games last season, and now a little bit of a bounce back with 19 points in 44 games this year, is still probably not the points production you want from an offensive first type of defenseman. Still though, I do think he could offer a pretty interesting option for the Kraken, especially considering, again, as I've said a few times over the course of this series, the Kraken will have much better defensive options than they will forward options. So going for a guy like Subban, even if he is on the tail end of his career, who has a little bit more of an offensively minded game on the defensive end, could help a little bit with some of the struggles the Kraken are likely to have in their top 6 forwards. And really, outside of Subban anyway, on the defensive end from the Devils, I don't think that there's likely to be a more tempting option, and certainly not likely to be an option more tempting than one of those prospect level guys on the forward end that could turn into a decent player down the road. Now, if Jonas Siegenthaler or especially Ryan Murray end up exposed with a contract, then maybe they become a tempting option, Murray more so than Siegenthaler, but I don't know that either one would be tempting enough to take over one of those promising young players on the forward end. There are also a couple of other guys like Josh Jacobs and Colton White that might be worth looking at, but neither one of those guys have contracts for next season, and neither one have played enough games to incentivize the Devils to give them contracts before the expansion draft. So I don't really think that either one of them would be a serious option for Seattle. So ultimately, when it comes down to it with the Devils, there still are a lot of options that could happen here with their protection lists. But as things stand right now, I think Seattle's choice is going to be between whether they want an experienced veteran like PK Subban that could offer the franchise a lot outside of what he can do on the ice, or if they want to go with more of a prospect type of forward that showed some promising signs this season, like Kukanen or Sharangovich, whichever one of those ends up exposed, or even Merkley if he's the option there. As far as any potential trades between the Devils and Kraken goes, I don't know how likely it is that one happens here. I mean, maybe the Devils just really want to hang on to those young guys that performed well this season and don't want to lose one of them to Seattle, in which case they do have some draft picks that they could give up, including 2 in the first round this season, which, again, remember, a first round pick this year is not worth quite as much as it is in most years, most likely. And again, trading draft picks is probably much more likely for the Devils than trading prospects because, again, they would be making a trade in order to protect their prospect pool. But still, I don't think it's terribly likely to happen, so Seattle probably gets one of those young forwards, if not PK Subban. Personally, I'm a big fan of Subban, so it would be a lot of fun to have him here in Seattle, but the best option for the Kraken as far as building a solid team for the future might be to go with one of those younger guys like Merkley or Kukanen if he's available. But that will bring us to the end of this one. So if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you liked or enjoyed this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section about the protection list and what kind of shenanigans the Devils could get up to with signing contracts, as well as who Seattle could get from this team. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.